Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Being a Stormtrooper is not an easy job. It's a thankless job. No one ever pats you on the back for successfully sterilizing a filthy rebel camp. But God forbid, should you decompress an entire corridor during a shootout in a ship, you get crucified with weeks of paperwork, disciplinary hearings, and sometimes they'll even dock your pay. I know you're not supposed to use detonators inside of a ship, but how the hell else are you going to hit anything? With all those rules, regulations, and monitoring, it's a wonder why anyone chooses to be a Stormtrooper at all. But somehow, every day, millions of brave men and women, not aliens, put on that sparkling white suit of armor and go out there and do their best to bring a bit of peace and stability to the galaxy. This episode is dedicated to them. No matter how terrible your day is going, most likely it's not as bad as what these Stormtroopers had to go through. This is the 5 worst times to be a Stormtrooper. When you have to police an entire galaxy, the odds are your troops aren't always going to be prepared for every situation. Such was the case when the local Lothal Imperial garrison, under the command of Governor Price, raided a rebel hideout. What started out as an ordinary battle, which involved insertion by dropship against a lightly defended rebel mining crawler, quickly spiraled out of control. The valiant Stormtroopers found themselves in a vicious ambush that included a small starship and several gigantic Force-sensitive wolves. To give you an idea of how terrifying the situation is, just look at how much trouble these normal wolves give Jedi Master and patron saint of kidnapped daughters, Liam Neeson. The Battle of Lothal quickly becomes a massacre, as giant wolves begin eating and ripping apart Stormtroopers. Keep in mind the video I'm showing you right now is rebel propaganda footage from a cartoon show designed for kids that plays on the Disney Channel. I'm sure the actual event was a lot more terrifying. To sum it up, the Stormtroopers on this deployment experienced the following: great fear and anxiety, loss of limbs, involuntary discharges of the bowels, death by consumption from a giant wolf, death by a giant wolf sitting on the head, death by being thrown off a cliff by a giant wolf, and naturally, transformation into wolf feces. Star Wars is a crazy franchise. It's so large that I can make a YouTube channel on it. It's so large that it also has subgenres. One of my favorite subgenres is the Star Wars zombie story. There's this book called Death Troopers, and it's a lot more literal than the overhyped troopers that guarded director Krennic. In this version of the Death Troopers, a small Imperial prison ship is on its way to delivering a bunch of criminal scum to a larger facility. On their way, they run into a derelict Imperial Star Destroyer, and naturally they send a boarding party onto that ship to see what's going on. Had they ever seen an alien film or Sunshine, The Thing, Event Horizon, Pandorum, they would have known to tell their commanding officer to go derelict their balls. What they find inside the Star Destroyer is a horrifying bioengineered plague that converts its victims to mindless zombies, and if that wasn't bad enough, they're controlled by a hive mind. The boarding party that goes onto the Imperial Star Destroyer finally make it back to their own ship, which is basically a giant container full of humans in cages, the perfect opportunity for a virus to spread. The rest is a cautionary tale about not boarding derelict anythings. Along the way, our heroes witness massive cannibalistic orgies, family-on-family cannibalism, Imperial-on-Imperial cannibalism. They even found a group of Imperials who weren't zombies, but decided to eat each other anyway. Why not? The Stormtroopers in this scenario went through the following: loss of awareness and control of bodily functions, getting eaten by colleagues, eating your colleagues, getting eaten by prisoners, getting eaten by your commanding officer, getting eaten by yourself, which is actually an interesting one, and of course, the classic eating someone who is eating you. When you're a Stormtrooper, you like having your feet planted on solid ground. And I mean real ground, planetary ground. As one of the Empire's finest, you are trained with a wide variety of tools that will ensure your survival in most combat situations, unless you're going up against a Jedi, or a named character, or a giant beast, or blind person, or angry Sith Lord. The point is, at least on the ground, you can run away when things kind of get a little bit hairy. When you're in space, you're at the mercy of the crew who is piloting the ship. There's no one to run. Let's say some rebel decides to disable your ship and then ram it into another ship. Or let's say some moisture farmer drops a proton torpedo down an exhaust pipe on the battle station you're serving on, or maybe some A-Wing pilot takes out the bridge of your ship, which unfortunately is flying too close to the surface of the second Death Star. And perhaps the most messed up scenario is when you think you're on a planet, but surprise, it's a giant superweapon that has just gone supernova because it can't contain the energy it just sucked up from a star. And that's the worst thing about being a Stormtrooper on a ship. you never know if that bulkhead you're leaning on won't vent you into space. Stormtroopers going through this scenario can experience the following: a constant feeling of helplessness, sleeping in the fetal position, having dreams about being vented into space, death from asphyxiation, death from exposure, death from explosion, death from being hit by a starfighter after getting vented into space. Most of the time, Stormtroopers could find peace in their noble sacrifices because they know it's all a part of the greater plan, the Emperor's plan. It's comforting to know that, especially when 40% of your organs are now outside of your body because a Rancor accidentally stepped on you, resulting in a surprisingly funny explosion that's kind of similar to what happens when someone steps on a full ketchup packet. But at the Battle of Jakku, roughly 1 year after the Battle of Endor and the death of the Emperor, the Empire was quickly crumbling. What was left of the Stormtrooper Corps gathered on Jakku, and quickly discipline fell apart, and the Stormtroopers started going all native and crazy. Imagine the second half of Apocalypse Now. When the rebels arrived over the planet and the battle found its way to the ground, the Stormtroopers had no cause to fight for, no future alien race to look forward to enslaving, which is perhaps just as terrifying as facing down force wolves and zombies. Stormtroopers during this event experienced the following: low morale, disillusionment with the Empire, dehydration, aimlessness, lack of job security, depression, and death from rebel scum. When talking about horrible moments in the Stormtrooper Corps' history, one cannot help but mention the Battle of Endor. What's really terrible about this battle is not only did a huge percentage of Stormtroopers on Endor die, when the fighting ended, no recovery teams came out to help out the wounded. No medics were available to comfort the dying. Instead, a giant pack of deadly man-eating Ewoks swarmed across the Force, consuming every Imperial dead or alive. There was no surrender that day for the noble Stormtrooper, no retreat. Many brave men and women ate a blaster bolt or a detonator as waves of Ewoks washed over them. Sinjar Rath Valis, an ISB agent who was lucky enough to survive this tragic defeat, recalled walking through a foggy forest, hearing the sounds of men screaming all around him as Ewoks dined on their intestines. This was one of the darkest days in the Stormtrooper Corps. Stormtroopers during this battle experienced the following: death by Ewok, death by rock, death by arrow, death by stick, and perhaps worst of all, the shame of being killed by a sentient teddy bear. So the next time you find yourself on guard duty loathing how boring your job is, remember these 5 incidents when Stormtroopers were not only stripped of their lives, but their dignity as well. And at least in 3 cases were eaten by someone else. Don't forget to subscribe and like us on Facebook, and a special thanks to all you Patreon supporters. Remember, any of our patrons who are Stormtrooper veterans, we do have a hotline that you can message us on if you want to talk about any of your past traumas. If we can't help you get rid of those nightmares, I know a guy who knows another guy who sells death sticks. Well guys, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.